my favorite hormone of all has to be thyroid hormone. And I'll be specific with that. It's T3. I don't take T3 without T4. You want to have a combination. But I say that because a lot of people who do take thyroid hormone, they only take T4. My understanding from, again, having read a lot of doctors' books and having talked to a lot of doctors who specialize in this kind of hormones, is that T3 and T4 together is better in most cases. So T3 hormone. Why is it one of my favorite hormones or my favorite hormone? For me, what I love about it is the amount of joy that it brings into my life. I mean, thyroid is really the most broadly beneficial hormone of all, from my point of view. Because if you have an optimal level of thyroid, then what that means is that you have an optimal level of signal to your mitochondria, which are the little energy factors inside your body, inside your cells, making energy. So you have an optimal amount of energy. Now, when we think of energy, we're like, energy to get out of bed, energy to work hard, energy to work out. But I'm not talking about that necessarily, although it is that. I'm talking about energy for your immune system to function properly, energy for your digestive system to function properly, energy for your nervous system to function properly, which includes the ability to calm down. Often if the nervous system doesn't have enough energy, that doesn't necessarily mean that you are tired. It could actually mean you can't sleep properly, because you're just overly stimulated. So, energy for your muscles, energy for your cardiovascular system, energy for every system of your body, every cell of your body is dependent on the optimal level of thyroid. And that's why, what I learned is having an optimal level of that is absolutely crucial. It's the prerequisite for everything else. And so everything else I'm going to recommend as well in terms of hormone supplementation is good. But sometimes I would not start with thyroid. If a person is already highly overstimulated and anxious, then thyroid can make that worse. If a person is very nutritionally deficient, then I wouldn't start with thyroid, because thyroid, by increasing your metabolism, it will increase your nutritional demands. And so sometimes I wouldn't start with thyroid, but the reason, if I, had to be on a desert island and they said you can only take one, pill with you or whatever, it would be thyroid, no question, because that gives every system of my body, including my brain, the energy that it needs to function the best that it can on a theoretical level. But in terms of how I feel, it gives me joy.
I was going to say, in that you made a really good point there, is that, if there's not enough of those building blocks, those nutritional aspects, trying to rev up the engine or get everything working more, by doing that, that's just going to put you into, my understanding is, put you into a deeper deficit, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah. If you're already low in really any nutrient, and especially the most important nutrients, and then you increase your metabolism, it could very well make you feel worse. So that's something that you have to be very careful of and aware of. And so personally, I would not recommend people just take it without supervision from a doctor. I think it's one of the only two things on this list that I've got that it's literally, you really shouldn't ever do it without a doctor. Ideally, you do everything with the supervision of a doctor who understands everything I'm saying here or more and can really guide you with it. But this is the red light, absolutely don't do it without someone who understands it. So even though it's my favorite, it does have to be treated with caution.
And if somebody, let's say they're like, oh, do I need thyroid? I mean, what would somebody generally be using it for? Is it purely for energy? If they're feeling fatigued, or they're like, I just can't get out of bed, is that what they would go to thyroid for?
The classics are, lack of energy, fatigue, constipation, dry skin, weight gain without the ability to lose weight, potentially anxiety, kind of depression symptoms as well. Classic blood markers other than thyroid ones are high cholesterol. That's a classic sign.
Why would that be?
Because thyroid helps the conversion of cholesterol into the next step, which is pregnenolone. So when you don't have enough thyroid, the cholesterol builds up. So yeah, I mean, there's more, but that's the reasons why people. Oh, and yeah, feeling cold. That's another thing. If you feel cold frequently, then that is a classic sign of low thyroid as well. And a lot of people don't realize about feeling cold. They just think it's normal to be cold in a lot of circumstances. Just the other day, my wife said to me, like whenever both her and I flew, we'd always feel cold, in the airplane and have to put like an extra layer on. And she said, yeah, I did. I flew to, she flew last week, and she's like, yeah, I felt like completely normal temperature, like no, need to put anything else on. I was like, yeah, I haven't flown in years, so I'll be interested to see if that's the case. I'm during flying next month, but I expect it is. So it's not necessarily that you're cold all the time, but it's the fact that you get easily cold, which, to me would be an indicator of low thyroid as well. And of course, just everything, because everything else, including all the other hormones that we'll talk about in different segments, their optimal functioning is dependent on the right level of thyroid.
Yeah, I know about the whole airplane thing. I'd make sure I'd have a nice big woolly jumper in my suitcase so I could bundle up, because otherwise it was always freezing. So I totally understand that one. So what would be the best form with thyroid?
That's a good question. So if you're into being natural, then definitely what's called natural desiccated thyroid, even as in the title, often shortened to NDT. I use the Armour brand, which I think was the original one. There are certainly other ones. And so what is that? That's literally the gland of an animal. The benefits of that are that it is natural. It has a ratio which occurs in nature, and it also perhaps has other constituents in there, like thyroid peptides. There's also T3 and T4 as what they would prescribe you as like an isolated compound, but there is also T1 and T2 in a glandular thyroid, which they're not sure if it's beneficial, but it might be. So the natural kind of whole food version of it would be a thyroid glandular. Perfectly adequate though, and in a certain situation actually superior, is a compounded combination of T3 and T4. Different people have different opinions in the ratio of that. The classic glandular ratio is like 4 parts T4 to 1 part T3. T3 is known to be 4 times as active as T4, so that means it's roughly the same amount of each. Some people disagree on that. Some people think even 2 to 1 is good, 2 parts T4 to 1 part T3. Some people say it should be 10 parts T4 to 1 part T3. So there's not a lot of, consensus on that. But generally kind of the middle point of the same as the glandular is, probably what you would err on the side of caution with. Now, why might the synthetic version actually be preferable? One reason is if you have a tendency to autoimmunity, and certainly if you already have autoimmunity.
And why would that be?
Because your immune system, if you're having 2 compounds versus like thousands of compounds in the glandular, your immune system is much more likely to react to. If it reacts to any one of the thousands in the glandular, then you've got an immune response to thyroid. Whereas if you're only taking the isolated T3 and T4, there's only 2 things for it to potentially react to. So it still happens that there's an autoimmune response to pure T3 and T4, but it's much less frequent.
And how would somebody use it?
So usually, the great thing about thyroid, as opposed to a lot of other hormones that are trickier to use, is it's literally a pill or a tablet that you swallow. In the case of Armour Thyroid, it's a tablet that you swallow. I do know some people who also sell it as a transdermal, which I think is interesting and potentially effective as well. So those are the only 2 types that I have ever seen. And
with that, I mean, I know we've briefly, I think it was on one of our episodes we just recorded, you talked about spacing it through the day. Now, if somebody's having a pill, how would they do that?
Well, you can cut up the pill. There's a pill cutter, or you can get pills, and this is what my doctor's provided for me, that are less than a day's dose. So with the case of the glandular, the dosage is in grains. So, with my doctor, he says to do 1 first thing and then 1 later in the day. And so I get 1 grain first thing, 1 grain later in the day. Now, Ray Pete, who we've talked about a lot, he talks about how the T3 gets cleared very quickly, like after about 3 hours. And so he personally would top up with a little bit of T3, a small amount every few hours on top of the basic T3, T4 combination. So in terms of how to use it, obviously with a doctor's supervision is best. Broder Barnes, who's one of first people I think who really help people to be aware of thyroid. Because I know some people, and I have a best friend like this, he will not see a medical doctor no matter what, and he's always trying stuff. So I have to have kind of advice for him. Because if I don't, he's gonna be even worse off. So it's always better to do it under the supervision of a doctor, without a doubt, but a doctor who actually understands everything that we're talking about here. But if you absolutely do not want to do that, then Broder Barnes said, I can't verify this, but he was a medical doctor who had a whole team of other medical doctors underneath him. He said that what you want to do is check your temperature, your underarm temperature specifically. You need to use one of those mercury type thermometers. They're not mercury these days, but they're some, I think, thallium or gallium, some kind of replacement for mercury. You need to use one of those and put it in your armpit for like 10 minutes at least, and then check it. They're much more reliable than the electric ones.
I'm guessing the mercury is going to be more accurate.
Yeah, much more accurate. You can see with the electric one, you do it, they turn it off, turn it back on, do it again, and it's like a couple of points difference, which it makes all the difference in the world. So what Dr. Broder Barnes said is that, first of all, okay, when do you test your temperature? Not first thing in the morning, not last thing at night. Better to check it after a meal, because sometimes your temperature can be artificially increased by stress chemicals, and that's least likely to happen directly after a meal. The meal calms you down. So, or if you're stressed, it calms you down. If you're not stressed, it actually stimulates you. So it depends where you're at. And what he said is anything less than 97.8 is, he defined as hyperthyroidism. And he actually said anything more than 98.2 could be hyper, meaning you're overdoing it. So that is how I'm not saying you should, but that's how he recommended to his clients, patients, to monitor the amount of thyroid that they're having and make sure it's not excessive, or make sure it's not, insufficient as well. Now, for women, this gets even more complicated than all the stuff I said, because women's temperature fluctuates through the month, and it's women, unfortunately, who need it more. So for women, you have to test it second or third day of the menstrual cycle, so just after the period's begun. If you're still menstruating. If you're not menstruating, then it doesn't matter. You can do it any day. But if you're menstruating, then you need to do it at that point in the menstrual cycle for the temperature reading to be accurate.
And what about safety concerns with supplementing with thyroid?
Yeah, they're significant. You absolutely can overdo it with thyroid. That's why it's sold as a drug. To me, that's the main reason. A lot of the hormones that I talk about are actually sold as dietary supplements, at least in the US. But thyroid is definitely not one of them. I think there's very few countries it's available over the counter. And that's because if you accidentally take far too much of most of these hormones once, it will not be an emergency room situation. And with the thyroid, it absolutely could be. You can definitely overdo it with thyroid. It is a very, very powerful thing. So, and also if you're just taking it willy-nilly, without being aware of all the stuff that I'm talking about, and, without doing tests and blood tests and all the rest of it to make sure you're not overdoing it. So it can be a real issue if you overdo it, even a little bit every day. And it can be a real issue if you overdo it a lot, even once. So it is dangerous. You'd have to do a lot for it to be really life-threatening. And my understanding is if you overdose, generally they're just going to tell you to stop, unless it is really extreme, in which case they do have medical interventions. But it's not something you want to mess around with. If you accidentally take way too much pregnenolone or progesterone, it's not a good idea. But I can tell you, if you call 911 and tell them that this is what's happened, they probably won't send an ambulance. That's really the distinction. So it is dangerous to overdo it, either even a little bit for a long time, or to overdo it by a lot, even once.
So what I'm hearing is thyroid takes care of so much. And if that is dysregulated in any way, then it's kind of like a domino effect for everything else. So that's one to really get right.
Yes, because for many, many, many reasons, but for me, the primary one being, if you don't have enough thyroid, you're not going to be producing enough energy in the right way in the optimal metabolism way. And so your body will have to go to a backup system to produce energy, which in terms of, the energy production itself, it's like glycolysis and gluconeogenesis and all these less efficient ways of creating energy, which create a lot more toxic byproducts and utilize things that you actually, don't need to, that you don't want to overuse. And on a how you feel level, they do that by increasing stress chemicals. So basically, if your thyroid is underactive, and that's really what we're talking about. The overactive is much more rare and is a medical condition outside anything I can comment on. But if your thyroid hormone is under optimal, then you will be running on stress no matter what. Doesn't matter how much you meditate, doesn't matter how much you smile, and doesn't matter how much you think happy thoughts, and actually doesn't matter how non-stressful your life might be compared to some people. Like, no matter what, you will be stressed much more than is optimal if your thyroid's low. So because stress is prematurely aging, it's the opposite of rejuvenating. It's anti-juvenating. That's another reason my thyroid's number one to me. Hey, I hope you enjoyed that clip from the Rejuvenate podcast. If you want to watch the full episode that came from, just click on the link above. Or if you just want to watch our latest video, then click the link below. And make sure that you subscribe to the channel and like the video. Thank you.